trout fishing is one of the most popular types of fishing behind base. There are several things attributed to this popularity, including the fact that trout always put up an acrobatic fight, they are easily accessible, and, when cooked, they taste great. There are 3 primary species of trout chased by anglers and scientists, along with an array of subspecies. The most common species include brown trout, brook trout, and rainbow trout. Rainbow trout. The best-known species of North American trout is the rainbow trout. Rainbow trout, Onchoinchus mycis, gets its name from the visible pink stripe found on the fish's side. However, that is not the only way you can identify them. Another giveaway is the black spots on the trout's dorsal fin and body, and the square, broad tail. You can find rainbow trout all along the Pacific coast, from Mexico up to Alaska. However, they have been brought into other regions, too. For example, rainbow trout are in all the Great Lakes, to the south, in Alabama and Georgia, and most of southern Canada. People stock this game fish species in bodies across the globe, and it is one of the most popular targets for fly fishing enthusiasts. In the rainbow trout family, you will find a few different types. If you have ever been fishing, the one you are most familiar with is likely the steelhead. These may look different, but they are the anadromous type of rainbow trout. The other subspecies of rainbow trout include the red band trout and golden trout. These can only be found in the Pacific and Midwest states naturally, but may be stocked in other regions. Cutthroat trout. The cutthroat trout do not get as much attention as the more popular rainbow trout. However, they do have a pretty intimidating name. Once you see this species, you will find out why. They get their name from the red coloring found under the lower jaw, making this trout look like it is bleeding from the throat or neck. If you are not sure if you have caught a cutthroat trout from the red color alone, you should also see smaller black spots on the top portion of their body, too. Naturally, cutthroat trout are found in the western portion of the United States, from the Rocky Mountains to the Pacific coast. You can also find this species in the southwestern portion of Canada, and the ones that travel via the ocean can be located as far north as Alaska. This species has also been introduced into parts of the northeastern US and Quebec. When it comes to subspecies, the cutthroat trout are considered the most varied with 11 options. Each of the subspecies looks unique and lives in certain drainage areas or rivers. Some national parks even have a unique version of Westlope cutthroat trout. Golden trout. The golden trout is one of the smallest of the trout types. Just like the name implies, the trout is golden in color and features reddish-orange stripes on the side of their body. Also, the rear right before the tail is spotted with darker marks. You can find the golden trout in higher altitude freshwater lakes and rivers found in more mountainous regions. Golden trout feed on small crustaceans and surface insects, such as terrestrial insects and freshwater shrimp. Because of how scarce the insects are during the winter months, the golden trout have a set feeding season, which starts in May and ends by September. You can also find this species of fish in the western regions of the US, including Wyoming, Washington, Idaho, and California. Brown trout. The name may be slightly misleading since brown trout are not always brown. You can find silver and golden colored brown trout, all this is dependent on where they live. Even though they come in varied colors, this species of trout is pretty easy to recognize. Typical brown trout have orange-red spots with a silvering around them. Another noticeable characteristic is that their brown trout has a salmonish look to them, more so than some of the other trout on this list. This is because the brown trout is somewhat related to the Atlantic salmon. Brown trout were introduced to North America from Germany. They thrived in the waters from Georgia to Ontario and throughout the Great Lakes region. You can also find brown trout from Colorado to California and even in British Columbia and Alberta, Canada. They are a favorite for those fly fishing local streams and rivers. Back in Europe, there are several subspecies of brown trout. The anadromous brown trout are referred to as sea trout, and the lake and river dwelling trout are referred to as lake trout or river trout, respectively. However, do not mix these up with the native lake trout in North America, as this is an entirely different species. Lake trout. The biggest species of the char family is the lake trout. This is a deep water fish that can grow to be more than 80 pounds. Their large size is one of the characteristics that makes them easily recognizable. However, they also have a forked tail and creamy spots, which sets them apart from some of the other species. If you are looking for a massive lake trout, they are native to Canada and Alaska, the Great Lakes, and the northeastern portion of the US. While this is true, through the years, the lake trout has spread beyond this region. Today, they can now be found in lakes across the US along with the Rocky Mountains. While the lake trout are not as varied as the Pacific trout options, they tend to make up for this because of the huge collection of nicknames they have been given. The name you hear depends on where you catch them. Some of the most common include togue, tuladi, great trout, namecush, and mackinaw. Dolly Varden trout. The Dolly Varden trout is considered one of the most northerly trout species in North America. This species is technically not a trout, it is a char. Only recently have people realized that the Dolly Varden is different from the Arctic char. This is a species of char that continued unnoticed for a while, and that was simply called a trout. This species can be found from the Arctic region, into Alaska, and down into the northern portion of Washington. Beyond North America, the Dolly Varden has made it across the sea and now populate rivers in Japan and Siberia. This species of char, not trout, looks like all the others. One of the most telltale characteristics is that dollies do not get over 10 pounds. They do not feature the worm-like marks found on brook trout, either, and the forks are not as deeply forked as the lake trout. Besides that, there are not too many defining characteristics. This is why the knot trout species were not correctly identified for so long. Brook trout. The next trout that is not really a trout is the brook trout, Salvelinus fontinalis. When it comes to size, the brook trout comes in on the small end of the spectrum. Most brook trout range between 1 and 2 pounds, and it is rare to find one in double digits when it comes to weight. Besides the size, one of the easiest ways to determine if you have caught a brook trout is to look for the worm-like markings on their back and head, and the white edges found on their lower fins. The brook trout is native to the eastern portion of North America and are popular for trout fishing. You will find this species in all the Great Lakes except Erie, north to the Arctic Sea, and south through the Appalachian Mountains. Today, it is possible to find this species of trout anywhere the water is cold enough, including the southern Canadian provinces and throughout the streams in the Rockies. While brook trout are native to North America, today they can be found across the globe. In fact, they have been taken as far as Europe, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia, and more. Some people consider the brook trout the exchange fish for the brown trout in America from Europe. Bull trout. When it comes to rare fish in North America, bull trout come at the top of the list. This species of fish only lives in cold, big drainages and rivers found in the Pacific Northwest. chances are, you will not see the bull trout unless you are looking for them. Your best bet to catch one is to fish in Alberta, Washington, British Columbia, or Oregon. Bull trout are very similar to Arctic char and Dolly Varden. This species was called Dolly Varden until the later part of the 1970s. One of the best ways to tell if you have caught a bull trout is their limited presence and bigger size. If you catch a trout that is 12 pounds or more, and if it does not have a very forked tail, you have likely snagged a bull trout. Tiger trout. A tiger trout is created by the cross of a female brown trout and a male brook trout. The offspring of these two do not look too much like either of its parents, or any other fish. They feature a work-like pattern across most of their body. They are also much thicker than most trout species found today and tend to throw their bodies around, putting up a significant fight at their end of your rod. This makes them a favorite option for most sporting anglers. You might never encounter a tiger trout in the wild, though. While they do live throughout the US, they are sterile and do not produce eggs. Your best bet for catching this type of fish would be to visit a stocked watershed. If you are lucky enough to find one, you probably will not forget it anytime soon. Splake. Splake is a mix between a female lake trout and a male brook trout. This species will eat other fish earlier than similar species of trout and grow faster because of this. They are often called Wendigo trout, which was derived from the beast out of Algonquian folklore. While splake can reproduce in the wild, this has only occurred a few times. Most splake will be bred and used in stock lakes and ponds. The most significant breeding program today is located in Ontario, which is where the government stocks them in the Georgian Bay, along with a few smaller lakes.
Please consider subscribing to our YouTube channel and click the bell to be notified when we post new videos.